I mean, obviously, I'm with you in terms of deflation should naturally, we should be living in a growth deflationary environment. The cost of our, living should be coming down over time, kind of on average.
Yep.
Obviously, assuming out, natural disaster and things like this, which will occasionally happen. But generally speaking, the cost should be coming down.
Yep.
But I'll tell you what, and I'm sure you understand this, but there are going to be some very big political and market, or at least crony capitalist market hurdles to that, because a lot of people are conditioned to believe that housing should just go up, right? And of course, you're Canadian. I'm sure lots of Canadian property markets. Famously, the Vancouver property market is people have this mindset of, oh, it's only going up. What's going to happen when we move into a world where actually, maybe certain high-level city properties or very great location properties will go up, but generally the cost of housing is going to come down, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to feel like they're getting screwed over because their quote-unquote asset that they put their life savings into is now coming down in price.
Yeah, and because if you're buying housing for the last 100 years, you're really short the dollar, right?
Yeah.
You know that you have an inflation rate in the dollar, and holding housing is shorts the dollar. I take on debt, and I'm short the dollar because it has to be inflated away, and my housing retains some of that value. But now, so then housing instead of being a utility, housing becomes a store of value, and it increases a monetary premium. And people think, well, the housing is my way to be able to save enough money, because my currency is a terrible currency, and you see this all over the world, and you see people doing that. But that's why Bitcoin doesn't care. My house has fallen in the last 4 years from 300 Bitcoin to 22 Bitcoin. And in 4 years, it's going to be 2 Bitcoin. And it doesn't care if you want to take Bitcoin into your currency to price things, and from that economic calculation, you think Bitcoin's going up because you're taking it into pieces of paper, you're welcome to do that. But Bitcoin doesn't care about that. It's repricing the world. And by the way, you could do this for people on your podcast that are, I know you know this, but how I break through this for a lot of other people who don't know it. Just instead of saying currency, say pieces of paper that I price things in, right? and it starts to be more real, right? And so in Canada, it takes 90,000 pieces of paper today to buy a Bitcoin. But if I go to Turkey, it takes 3 million pieces of paper to buy a Bitcoin. And if I go to Argentina, it takes 55 million pieces of paper to buy a Bitcoin. And then you ask yourself, there's a whole bunch of people in Turkey that believe their pieces of paper are worth money too. So why wouldn't it look the same all over the world? So I agree with you. Most people are going to get caught in that, and they're going to price Bitcoin from their currency thinking it's going up. And it's going up forever when it is actually not. All prices are falling relative to it forever is a far better way to look at what's happening in Bitcoin. Because you know this, but we have a $900 trillion global ledger, right? And that $900 trillion global ledger will not be 900 with 400 trillion of debt. And if the 400 trillion of debt was actually truly marked to market, the 900 trillion would be gone too, because that's just inflated asset prices because of the 400 trillion of debt. But there's a $900 trillion global ledger that in 5 years won't be 900 trillion. It might be 2 quadrillion. But Bitcoin doesn't care about that either. I know people do, right? Because they're pricing from a globally manipulated ledger. But Bitcoin doesn't care. It's repricing everything. And the other side of that argument, or the other side of that thing that people miss on Bitcoin, is the relative purchasing power of Bitcoin today. So if you just took 900 divided by 21 million or 20 million or whatever lost coins you think would be, it equates to a terminal value today of about 42 million per Bitcoin. Right? And that, if it stays decentralized and secure, is for sure what it's worth today in relative to purchasing power, kind of played out into the future. But it'll be way higher than that because prices fall to the marginal cost of production. So it's not just higher because measured in a global ledger of 2 quadrillion, that'll be 84 million per Bitcoin, right? And people think it's going up because they're not measuring the ledger, the other ledger. People should measure things in price of Bitcoin, and they'll see it's just the free market and it's imposing a discipline. And if you really care about your piece of paper, if you care about government getting bigger, government can't get bigger relative to that. So they can by creating more pieces of paper. But this is going to impose it on all governments as well. And eventually, and the governments that are understanding this will be in service of their citizens rather than preying on them. And so it's bound to break a whole lot of beliefs along the way, and a whole bunch of but that's the pattern that's doing it. It's repricing the world, not the other way around.
And it reminds me very much of either looking into history or looking into the future, depending on how you look at it, right?
Yep.
Because as you were giving us with that example, it's all like the German mark, right? It's all just going to go, it's all going to eventually go to infinity, priced in, fiat pieces of paper, as you said. And I think a lot of people commit what I call, or what is known as home country bias, right? Like we just think of things as like, oh, I'm only going to invest in my local country. I'm not going to think about the rest of the world.
Totally.
But actually, if you actually did look at the rest of the world, you might see other countries that are further ahead of you on the timeline. As you said, and certain countries have gone through this in cycles, right? Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, these kinds of countries, Zimbabwe, everyone knows some of these countries. And there are countries who are going through it in advance of others, right? So say Japan, say Turkey,
Yep.
They're kind of ahead of us in the timeline if you compare those countries to, let's say, the Western world, Australia, US,
Yep.
UK, etc. And, I think that's a very misunderstood thing because most people don't read history. They're not looking at, or they might sort of look with a kind of sense of, oh, that's happening in some other country, but that wouldn't happen here, right? They get this kind of, it wouldn't happen here. It can.
That's actually exactly why you have to say, are there a whole bunch of people in that in that currency who believe in their piece of paper? And of course there are. So why are they different than you? And for me, that's the click that gets people to go, aha, I get it. It's a rate of theft in every currency. It's just what rate of theft and where are you on that timeline? And the entire thing's insolvent. By the way, that rate of theft can continue for a long time because every time all of these other currencies fail, US actually gets stronger because that means you're strip mining those other countries. Their labor and materials, their labor and raw materials become cheaper.
And even their talent
And
as well.
that's
Yeah,
what I
as
mean.
you said.
Their labor and
Yeah.
so and again, Bitcoin doesn't care about that either. It just continues to price the real market.